Jessica Leary Allen, yes, Bob said she's making an encore appearance. Jessica started with us on this journey way back in March when we first began offering these sessions. She was a very popular featured presenter doing workshops, guiding nonprofits through this journey. And she brings with us a wealth of experience in advancement development as a nonprofit executive, having served at Case Western Reserve University, the City Club of Cleveland, and Fairmount Fine Arts Center. She now works as a consultant, and her fingerprints are present with dozens of prominent nonprofit organizations throughout our Northeast Ohio community. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, but I'm going to plant a seed with each of you that we are closing our registration for our Spark Grit to Great Leadership Symposium tomorrow morning. That will close at 1 for all of you to give you time to register. We're keeping it open till 1 o'clock so you can do it at the end of this session. So with that, Jessica, thank you for joining us again, and we look forward to your continued leadership.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I always think that maybe you were just talking to my mom when you give those introductions because they sound the way she talks to her friend, her book club about me. So thank you for that. So yes, I'm Jessica Allen. I'm so excited to have some of you from, as much as I'm in Cleveland is home and my favorite place in the world, I am an avid traveler, have been desperately missing travel. So seeing words like Montana and Tennessee and Houston come up in this list today just totally lifted my spirit. So thank you for being here. And a lot of the examples I'm going to give today are about our community here in Northeast Ohio, but as we all know, fundraising is pretty universal. So hopefully what we talk about today will ring true for many of you. So yes, as Marianne said, I'm a nonprofit fundraising consultant. And so these last 6 months have been really interesting. I really consider myself, aside from travel, my other love is baseball. And so I like to call myself a utility infielder. I like to go in where the organization needs help in fundraising, whether that's grant writing, campaigns, and dig in and do the work with folks. So, so I've been digging in with clients and friends and peers over these last months and really thinking about what do we need, not just to do our work, but also to support ourselves as professionals. And so that's really where this presentation came to be. I have to tell you, I have been quoting it's Carol, oh gosh, now I should have, Carol Dweck, right, the Mindset book. I've been quoting that book and living by that book for a long time, and it wasn't until the quarantine that I actually read the book that I've been quoting and talking about all this time. So, you know, I think mindset is just such an important part of what we're doing, and it's an important part of being able to keep up the enthusiasm and energy for the kind of work that we do as fundraisers and as nonprofit administrators. So with that said, I am going to jump in. Again, please do share questions in the chat. I would love to answer those as we go, and we should have some time at the end to answer and have a little discussion as well. So I'm going to get our slides started here. Okay, so 8 mindsets to help you maintain your fundraising momentum. Back in March, when we were first doing these lunchtime leadership breaks, we were calling them Way Forward workshops, because I think for some of us, we were just really scrambling to figure out what to do in the moment. But now it's all about momentum and how do we keep doing what we're doing, and how do we look at what here in Cleveland may be a long inside snowy winter, and how we keep our enthusiasm and mindset where it needs to be to do our work. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about where we are. We're going to go over these 8 mindsets that I've identified, and then we'll have some time in small groups and have some time for questions. So I have really upped my reading. I don't know about you all, but being home more has given me an opportunity, I think, to think a lot more globally, if you will, about our field and what we do. So I pulled together some favorite or some information that I thought was pertinent to what we're going to talk about today. So we are, as nonprofit people, the 3rd largest private employer in the U.S., which I guess I knew, but when I see that 12.5 million number, it's impressive, and you know, I feel proud of that as well. So there are a lot of us. The downside of what's happening now is that a lot of us and our peers and our colleagues and friends are unfortunately losing positions. So we've seen, according to Johns Hopkins study that was quoted in the New York Times, we've seen 1.6 million jobs lost just up until May, and then, as we know, more through the summer. So many of you may be familiar with Candid. Candid is the organization that was created when the Foundation Center and GuideStar merged, and they offer all this really great research and information on our field. But this summer, they looked at a little over 300,000 US-based nonprofits. They sort of ran these organizations through 20 possible scenarios through the COVID pandemic, from best case scenario to worst case scenario. And they found that up to 120,000 nonprofits may close this year. That's the doomsday number. It shouldn't be that many, but it's going to be somewhere in there. So we're all really feeling this and thinking about this. How do we keep ourselves afloat? How do we keep ourselves thriving to the best of our ability? So with all that sort of discouraging news, the great news, I think, is that 25% of donors surveyed in this New York Times article that I read said that they will increase their giving this year because of COVID. So we are seeing more giving, which is a promising thing. So I just wanted to provide that little snapshot, give you some of those numbers. I should share as well, after this webinar today, I have compiled links to any article or anything I talked to you about today so that you can fact check all those. This is what happens when you're married to a college professor. You're not allowed to state a fact without referencing it officially. So you'll get that. So if you want to be sharing some of this with your board or your peers, or you just want to grouse about it with your partner at the dinner table, I will give you full access to everything that we're talking about today. So let's jump into what I think these 8 mindsets are that will allow us to move forward as successfully as we can. So the first one, and interestingly, this is something we talked about back in March, was acceptance, right? The situation we're in, it hasn't happened before. Our roles have changed. Our resources for many of us have really fundamentally changed. Many of us are now falling asleep with that mantra in our head, you know, control what we can control, but there are some things that are just going to be out of our control. But I think having this mindset of accepting where we are, accepting what our natural limitations are, is really a great jumping off point. What we want to avoid, or what I want to see people avoiding, is what we call in our house magical unicorn thinking. We want to accept what's happening as realistically as we can, right? Sometimes I'll talk to a client and they say, well, you know, we think things might be better by October and we can squeak in our gala. And, you know, as much as we want to be optimistic, and I do believe as fundraisers, we are pretty optimistic people. We kind of jump in and make things happen. We want to avoid as much as we can magical thinking, and really try to stick with, you know, with making the best decisions we can given the information we have. So after we've accepted where we are, to me, the next thing is the hustle. And most of you have already been doing this for many months. You've been doing this pre-COVID too. Again, we don't go into this field because we like sitting at desks and just thinking about the work we have to do. We like to hustle. So hustling, to me, though, it's a decision. It's a choice you make every day. It's not a choice you have to choose at the top of your list every single day, but you've got to choose to hustle more days than you choose not to. And I wanted to share a story. Many of you who are here with us in Northeast Ohio are familiar with Edwin's. Edwin's is a restaurant in Shaker Square, just outside of Cleveland, that is a jobs training program. It's a beautiful, wonderful, very fancy French restaurant that brings formerly incarcerated individuals into its jobs training program. These individuals have a chance to be trained as cooks, as chefs, as they become experts on wine and cheese. They're servers, and it's this beautiful, wonderful thing. I will tell you, and I think I have this in my slides, it's to me one of the coolest things in Cleveland. There's a documentary about it called Knife Skills. But Edwin's is fancy. In my house, I've been there exactly once when my husband had a very noteworthy birthday. So fancy French indoor dining and the COVID pandemic in March in Cleveland don't mix. There's really nothing there. And Edwin's is a nonprofit. It works as a restaurant, but it is funded as a nonprofit. Edwin's was brilliant at hustle. Brandon, their founder, immediately started doing things like, back when none of us could find milk or eggs, he took their small butcher shop and started selling milk and eggs and other necessities. He also took this fancy French menu where, you might pay $17 for a tiny piece of cheese with quince paste. And he created this 4 for $40 comfort food. And he's slinging meatloaf and braised short ribs and chicken fried steak and all this food that we were all wanting back back in the spring when things were feeling uncertain at a price that people could afford. And it was keeping his organization running. It was keeping his people working. It was giving them a goal to work towards together. And it was really hustling. And now that the weather here is nice, he's created this beautiful outdoor space. He's hosted some lovely outdoor dinners. And it's just been a great example of that. So I like to share examples for these where I can. Edwin's Restaurant, to me, here in Cleveland, has done an exceptional job with it. So the next mindset I want to share is adaptability. So if you happen to be with me for any of our presentations in the spring, we talked a lot about adaptability. So adaptive challenges are, here we go. Adaptive challenges. So technical challenge is a challenge we face every day. So my car gets a flat tire. So I either know how to fix it, or I call USAA and they come and fix it, or I call somebody to come pick me up. There's a problem and there's a solution. An adaptive challenge tends to be a challenge that we've not faced before, or we don't know a quick solution to. And I think for many of us, well, let me go through this process actually. So the process when you're looking at an adaptive challenge is you have this question, you have the challenge. What you want to do is run small experiments to see what can get you from point A to point B. So you ask the question, you run the experiment, then you evaluate those experiments, what's working, what's not. You learn from that, and then you move back to the question again. So instead of being, again, in this technical, here's the challenge, here's the solution, solve the problem, move on. It's this question of really asking yourself over and over, running the experiment over and over. So when we think about this adaptability mindset, I have a couple examples of former clients and friends who come to mind. One would be Fairmount Center for the Arts, where I worked as the executive director years ago, and my kids take classes now. It's a wonderful, tiny but powerful community arts center. They have a huge art show, huge for Fairmount Center in Novelty, Ohio anyway, where they bring in hundreds of artists who show, and it's this beautiful experience that's been happening for I think about 45 years. So it should have happened in May, couldn't happen in May. So they started asking themselves, what can we do? What are the experiments we can run? And they looked at many models, ended up doing this beautiful, safe, distanced art show drop-off this August. And I will tell you that their entries went up over 30%, which is to me just really incredible. They took this art show that should all be in person and very clustered, and they were able to make it into this wonderful opportunity for artists to still show, for the community to still enjoy. And again, there are links to that in the sheet that we'll be handing out. Another example of adaptability is there's a great little documentary film festival in my hometown. But a film festival happens every October when it's chilly out here, and has to do with sitting crunched. My memory of it over the last years is like crunched in the theater watching white rhinos being saved on the screen. It's a very close contact kind of event. The documentary film festival early on pivoted, started showing streaming documentaries at home with a local company here called Boxcast, and then started doing drive-in movies, which we're seeing a lot. But I include this example because their initial thought was, we'll do everything outside. They sort of initially created this plan, and then as they started doing these little experiments of streaming from home and started talking to more people, it really changed. Their plan changed, and now they're poised to have a great event next month. So that's a quick peek at what I think is adaptability, and I share this model again in one of my last slides. And if you've been to a presentation with me before, you know that I like to think about slides in terms of what would I print off and stick up over my desk. But this question, experiment, evaluate, learn, this is the model we should be asking ourselves as fundraisers and organizational professionals every day. All right, let's talk about connection. So my theory of fundraising, especially those of us who do major gifts, principal gifts, is we love connection. We like to connect with people. We like to talk about the organization we work for and how passionate we are about it. And back in March, it felt like connection was gone. How are we going to do this? So many of you have come up with great creative ways to continue the connection. But I like to throw this in here because one conversation I feel I have so much as a consultant is reminding people to take the time to make meaningful connections. Our donors love to hear from us. They love a personal touch point from all of us. And this is not rocket science. This is kind of fundraising 101, but sometimes seeing someone like me remind you to do that or remind you of how important it is can help you take a little time to do it. One thing I preach a lot is connections doesn't have to be fancy or formal. It can be, one thing I love to do is share articles. And so I try to, if I find a well-sourced article that I even think would relate to a client I had a few years ago or a board member I worked with recently, you know, forward those and just say, I'm checking in, want to see how you're doing. You know, forwarding a joke, if you can find a clean, politically appropriate joke these days, you could certainly forward that. Handwritten notes, we know all these things, but connection is more important than ever before. This case study I want to share here is, as I've been working with a school district that has this list of what I like to call, in a very non-technical way, fancy donors. So these are the donors that they would love to get to that they have not gotten to yet. And so this list has literally just sat on somebody's hard drive for years. They paid someone to create this beautiful list, and then it sat there because it felt so big to think about how to connect with folks that they didn't know well. And all we did this fall, or all we're doing this fall, is sending a letter kind of saying, here's where we are. We know we don't know you well in normal times. We'd love to be talking to you and meeting with you. But what we're doing is sending this note just saying we'd like to connect. And it's not going to offend anyone. It's not going to hurt anyone's feelings. And if it creates some connection, I think that's great. And the final thing I'll say in connection is I've learned the hard way, to me, the best thing any of you as fundraisers, executive directors could do right now is set aside a block of time on your calendar that repeats every week. And that's your connection window. And it can be 15 minutes. It can be 30 minutes. One of my first bosses had like a little crystal thing with thank you notes in it. And she would just, at a certain time every week, pull those notes out and write notes. And when the 15 minutes was up, those were the notes for the week. But taking the time to do that and keeping in the front of your mind that connection is where it's at, I think will serve us all well. So this was almost the same slide as connection because it's pretty close, but let's talk about relationships. And what I really want to touch on here, and again, what I'm hearing as I'm talking to friends and peers, is we are doing a good job thinking about our connections, sometimes with our donors, sometimes with our community at large, our stakeholders. The two things that I think are so important right now, and I would love to see more people give a little focus to as we move into fall, is making sure we're working on those relationships with our colleagues. Even though we're farther along in the pandemic, we have more answers, we still have a lot of questions. Taking time each week, to me, to just put at the top of your mind that I'm going to check in and see how folks are doing is great. You know, one thing I did actually this morning, and this is outside of the fundraising realm, but I have three kids at home doing virtual learning, and it has been bumpy. We had the whole Zoom system crashed at the middle school. My daughter's on her third Chromebook that won't show she can hear everyone, but no one can hear her, so we're patching in. I mean, it's not been a great week. But each of my kids has had one teacher who I've heard through just walking through the room and listening, somebody who's done something exceptional, who's really gone above and beyond. So, and I promise I'm not brown nosing for A's. I dropped a little note to each of those teachers this morning and just said, you know, just checking in and letting you know, I loved that you suggested that Kate use the chat function because she couldn't talk to you, or just pointing out little things. Those are the relationship builders, right? And again, we are doing the heavy lifting right now, but taking time to do that is so important. Couple examples here, other than that one, Building Hope in the City is a terrific organization in Cleveland. They're clients and friends of mine. Their executive director, like I mentioned, the little note, crystal thing with thank you notes in it, this whole time has just been really maintaining relationships with key board members through phone and checking in a couple times a distanced coffee. So again, so important. And then another longtime friend of mine who's actually in higher ed fundraising and alumni relations through the whole pandemic has been doing Thursday night Zooms with former colleagues and peers. So people he may have worked with 30 years ago. And sometimes they get on and like play games. Sometimes they get on and chat, but it's been really consistent. And the last time I talked to him, he said, this is more peer networking than I've done ever before. So a couple little ideas to throw into your toolkit and give you the opportunity to get that relationship mindset going. So let's talk about resources. So this first bullet here, many of you have probably already done this, right? Maybe early on you said, okay, what do we have? What do we need? Or who needs what we have? If you haven't done that in a while, I will not be offended if you're looking down and doing it right now. But I think really getting your head wrapped around your resources. So what does your organization have to offer right now and who needs it? I think one important way that I'm seeing really successful organizations look at resources right now is in sharing resources. I don't want to be a total Pollyanna, but I think that some people are more open to sharing maybe than they were before. And I'm hopeful that will continue, but looking at ways you can partner with other organizations, maybe finding the time and space to open up to similar, organizations with similar missions, or maybe who have similar goals and desire similar outcomes, and seeing where you can connect. I think this can also be a huge money saver too. And the example I'll give for this is actually my husband's involved in a small nonprofit, the Collegiate Leadership Competition, and they had to cancel all of their competitions last spring. They decided to move this entire in-person college student competition model online. They needed $15,000 to buy a license to use a program called Canvas. That's a higher ed program that allows for interactive learning and things. It's like a Google Classroom, but on steroids. And there's no $15,000. There's no way to get that money. So they really sat for probably a good 6 weeks thinking this is a roadblock, we'll never figure it out. But ended up calling a local university that they have some connections with and said, we know you have a subscription to this. Is there any way we could pay you to be part of this? And we could share the license with you. And within 15 minutes, the school said, yeah, great, you can use it, no charge, it's fine, we're happy to support this with you. So to me, that's that mindset of like, not just saying, well, we don't have this resource, or here's the resource we need, but we don't have the cash to get it, and saying, how can we get it? How can we, utilize the resource elsewhere to get us where we need to be? So yeah, looking at ways to fill gaps, looking at ways to take advantage of what's already out there to strengthen what you're doing. So let's talk about possibilities. I love this little question-headed person on this slide. I feel like this is maybe what I look like a lot of days sitting at my desk. The possibilities, again, I like to think most of us as fundraisers and nonprofit folks, we think in possibilities. This is where we're at our best. And it's okay to have days where feels like there are no possibilities or nothing's ever going to work. That's normal and healthy. But taking some time each day or each week to think, how could we really thrive in this situation? Looking at what others are doing, looking at these really creative loops that will help you connect, thinking through that adaptive challenge. What are the possibilities out there? And I'm going to share with you what is, of all the reading I've done, I think this spring and summer, my favorite story. I'm going to try to do it justice. I'm going to refer to my notes because I want to give everybody credit here. But there was an article that I came across a few weeks ago in the Boston Globe that was talking about this amazing project. So spring hits, things aren't going well. The fishermen in Boston, and fisher humans, I'm not sure how to say that, PC, fishers, were struggling because they were catching all this fish and there was no one to buy it. I mean, restaurants aren't open. Who needs all this fish that folks are fishing? And so families are struggling because they can't sell the fish. This is causing big economic repercussions in the community. So there's an organization called Catch Invest. That's a nonprofit that helps support the fishing industry. And so Catch Invest came up with this plan that, when you think about possibilities, here's what they did. They said to the fishermen, we are going to hire you to catch haddock. Haddock is a mild white fish, right? We're going to hire you to catch as much haddock as you can. Then we're going to invest some money in a processing and filleting factory we're going to make this donation to them that's going to help them process and fillet the fish. Then we're going to hire this soup company out of a suburb of Boston. And the soup company is going to take the fish you've caught, the fish we've helped to process, and turn it into haddock chowder, like a white fish chowder. And so they worked with the soup company, they worked with some chefs, they were actually able to create this chowder that was 25% lower in fat than the normal chowder you might buy at a restaurant or the store, and had more protein, more vegetables in it. And so fishermen, fillet, soup plant, they turned it into quarts of soup that were frozen and distributed to local food banks and churches and places that needed to feed people around Boston. And the first time they ran this loop, this fish chowder experiment, they were able to create 56,000 servings of this, high protein, healthy chowder that then went out into the community. This story like lit me up, because I thought, what am I missing in the organizations I work with where we could find somebody maybe to make that investment? So let's say Catch Invest, they didn't share how much money they invested. Let's say they invested $500,000. Could they have given that to a food bank and fed a lot of people? Absolutely. I mean, we give to our local food bank. It's a beautiful, noble thing to support. But think about that, by investing in the fishermen, now I have to see what the right gender term is for fishermen, because I feel like I'm saying it wrong, but investing in the fishing community, the processing plant, the soups, the chefs, they were able to take this beautiful gift and really make a difference. I don't know, I hope that story inspires you the way it inspired me, but to me, that was all about mindset, right? What's possible? How can I stretch this? How can I really think in possibilities? So the last mindset that I want to share with you is gratitude. And this does not only come from being the granddaughter of a woman who would expect us to write our thank you notes literally before we threw the wrapping paper away from them. But gratitude, we know it. This is fundraising 101. But never letting that opportunity to say thank you pass by, making sure that you're doing it quickly and effectively. I do think one interesting side effect of many of us being at home more is, I don't know, I'm like noticing when I don't get thank you notes maybe as much. I'm a little more tuned into that because the pace of life is a little bit different. Don't forget to be grateful to your team, making sure you're taking time to do that. And I actually included this case study because about 6 weeks ago, I hosted a Zoom event for a local congressional candidate. It was way out of my comfort zone. I haven't been super active politically recently, but I thought I'm going to invite friends and try to help this candidate. And so I hosted the Zoom and brought friends into the fold. And I did finally receive a thank you note just the other day, and it was a beautiful handwritten thank you note. My grandmother even would have stamped approval on it. But I received 3 requests for money from the campaign before I ever got a thank you from that event. And I can't see all of your faces, but if you're fundraisers like me, you're probably cringing because we're like, oh, we've probably done that before too. But just a reminder to keep the thank yous right now at the top of mind. That should really be the thing that we're all thinking about the most. So that's where my head is. Those are the 8 places that I'm thinking. And what we're going to do now, because I think a really important thing for all of us is having the chance to sort of connect and synthesize this information. So I understand some of you may need to go, but for those of you who can stay for a few minutes, we're going to jump into a small group case study. Bob is going to pop you into groups of 4 here starting in a minute. And let me just go over quickly our case study. And then what I'll do is I will put this in the chat box. I will cut and paste this so you have it to refer to while you are working in your groups. But again, putting these mindsets into play. Let's say you're a major gifts officer and you've been tasked with raising $500,000 by the end of the year to make sure one of your key programs continues successfully. You've been nervous, as many of us have, to approach donors for targeted asks since the start of COVID, but time's up, it's time to go. And I will tell you, this came from talking to a foundation director for a university nonprofit who is sort of sharing this story. So this is a real story. So you've got to raise $500,000 by the end of the year. Here are your prospects. So you have a longtime major donor who supported the program in the past, but just hasn't made it onto any of your development folks' radar. You haven't spoken with her since February. You have a newer volunteer who has some capacity through the Family Foundation, but hasn't given yet. You haven't met this person, but you have a program manager at your organization who has. And then the third prospect we're going to look at is a consistent annual fund donor who has not made a major gift yet, but you think through some prospect research has some capacity to give. You've had some light banter this spring, you've connected a little bit, but have not yet made an ask. So again, we're going to pop this in and just take a few minutes among your small group to have a discussion about who you might ask, or would you ask all of them, one of them, none of them, and what mindsets we've talked about today that might help you get to that gift that you need to close. So Bob, I'm going to let you pop people into groups, and again, I will be pasting this right now into our into the chat so you can see the case study.
Back, and going to turn it over to Jessica if you wanted to, I don't know if you wanted to share any thoughts, but we can move along with some Q&A then.
Sure, yeah. I think in the interest of time, we will head into question and answer so we get you out of here on time. I am a giant fan of ending things on time. But hopefully that gave you a little time to have a conversation and nobody was checking on you if you knocked out the case study in 2 minutes and just caught up. That's totally cool too. We can all use that as well. But yeah, I'm happy to answer, any questions. And I will say this again in a minute, but this is what I do. This is what I love to do. And I'm happy to talk with anyone as well. I'm actually, let me share my contact info. Oh, I just did that wrong. I will share it in just 1 second, but feel free to populate the chat with any questions.
Yeah, so while you're typing those in, we can get started with one, Jessica. I know, so you've characterized, through the 8 points, and I was sharing with Jessica, and for those that don't know me, my background is in advancement and fundraising, and that, that positive mindset, the half glass full place of abundance is, a very common attitude and perspective that fundraisers share. But if you're managing a team or even within a fundraising team, not everyone is necessarily there. So what are some strategies, or how have you dealt with when you've had individuals who are perhaps half glass empty in terms of either everything going on or that just happens to be their disposition?
Right. That is, as I said to Bob, I did only take 1 or 2 psychology classes through my schooling, so I don't know if I have a great answer for that. But it is a challenge. In fact, I was on a call earlier with a former colleague, and we were just talking about that. How do you, when you're an optimistic, upbeat person, and you're trying to maintain that enthusiasm for the work, how do you bring that into the group? So, I mean, I think at this point, to me, that's always a one-on-one conversation, right? And you're not going to change how somebody is fundamentally. But I think it's important and good if you can say to somebody, well, what will motivate you about this work that we're doing? Because we have to stay motivated, and we can be pragmatic and practical, but we also have to be optimistic that we'll get through this and get through whatever other challenges come our way. So to me, so many problems can be solved with a one-on-one conversation. So I guess that's not a brilliant answer, but it's an honest one. And that's what I would do. And then just ensuring, again, are you checking in with your team? Are people happy? Are you, when I was an executive director, when I sensed things were bad, I brought donuts, but we can't, in many cases, depending on where you are, we're not in offices yet. We can't all share donuts. So what feels as good as a donut? I don't have an answer for that, but thinking of a way to keep people happy is important.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. And then we have time for just one more quick response. But a lot of the examples that you provided were from nonprofits, organizations that provide direct service. And I think there's an easy way to talk about the compelling need and the service provided. Do you have, what recommendations or advice do you have for any of our nonprofit colleagues that don't provide a direct service in terms of what their footprint looks like, and how do you communicate that need or specific request for support?
I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, can you ask me that last part one more time, Bob?
Sure. A nonprofit that doesn't provide direct service, how might they express kind of their relevance during the pandemic?
Oh, absolutely.
And
well,
what
I mean,
looks like.
yeah, Absolutely. So I think too, I mean, if we're talking about, there's been so much focus on basic needs. And so for those of us who are, let's say, a botanical garden, and I've done a lot of work in arts and culture and with museums, and, you know, I can quote you all the reasons why art and nature and all these things are important. But it can get lost when we have people who are facing unemployment, eviction, hunger, core basic need issues. So, you know, I think the thing to do is to, keep up your dialogue with the people who do understand what you're doing. You know, I think it can be a nice time if you have some happy stories. If you're thinking about the community at large, what can you be pitching to your local papers and things to tell the story of maybe joy that you're bringing. If you're talking about being an arts and culture organization, if you're talking about, you know, higher ed, it's tricky. I get it. I hear ya. But just looking for, if you're not in a position to do a lot of direct asking, or you don't feel that you can go out and seek new donors because of the work that you do, I think sharing the joy where it is really important. I wish we had more time and I could hear your thoughts too, because I don't think that was perfect, but that's where
No, absolutely. That's great. Thanks for bringing us joy and the great dialogue today.